Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Leaf Peepers Quilt Along. Today, I'm piecing our second block. This is a beautiful kind of cutaway block. It's very asymmetrical in oranges and golds. So let's get started piecing this really interesting leaf block together. So here is our second Leaf Peepers block, and as you can see, there are lots of little pieces here, and I have already gone ahead and made all of my half square triangles to this block. You can find a video that I shared last week on a simple method to make half square triangles, and then this week Sherry's sharing a video with a different method to make a lot more half square triangles at once, so make sure to check out her video too. Now you are going to have one leftover unit. This is fabric D and fabric E combined together to make a half square triangle. You only need one of them, so this is leftover and that's just fine. Don't worry, don't panic if that happens to you. So here we go. This is how it's supposed to look whenever you get everything laid out. Take your time getting it to this stage, and then now I'm going to clip together the pieces and take it to my machine. And I'm going to work one row at a time. So I'm going to flip this over. And you could use a pen. I'm just going to use these little mini clips, these mini Wonder Clips. I really like them because they just hold the fabrics together lightly and they're really quick to use. So what I'm doing is starting from the bottom, I flip over the piece so it's right sides together, and I'm making sure I'm not transposing something, I'm not rotating it around, I'm just taking it straight off the mat, picking it up, and going straight down, just a straight flip. And that's really important. You know, it doesn't matter which way you do it, you just want to figure out some sort of method of transferring your design from the table to your machine without everything getting all discombobulated. And I do like having everything connected together in a row. It just makes it a little bit faster to piece together, so that way I'm not constantly stopping and starting, constantly going back over to my mat to grab the next set of pieces. I have an entire row connected together. I'll take that to my machine, piece the entire thing, and then I'll be able to return and have it all put together. So there are all the pieces connected together. Let's take it to the machine and start piecing. Now before we get started piecing, I'd like to go over just a few things that I set up on my machine to start. I do dial down my stitch length to 1.5 millimeters to produce a really nice tight stitch. I am using a 1/4 inch patchwork foot, and I have covered my machine bed here with a queen size Supreme slider. It's a slippery sheet used for machine quilting usually, but I position it here to the front, and that just helps the pieces slide into the machine. I'm actually going to shift it up just a bit, and that'll help them slide straight off and under the foot. Okay, here we go. So my first piece is right here. I'm going to remove that Wonder Clip. And what I like to look at, I like to flip the piece over and look for areas of seam allowance. And so here we have a half square triangle and the seam allowance is there. So I'm going to rotate the whole row so that way that can be what I start with. And the reason is I want to start with the bulky thing first so that way I can get my needle into it and lock it in place. So that way it's not at the end where it can kind of push down and cause the pieces to slip out of place at the end. Okay, this looks good. I'm going to take a couple stitches off my scrap charger, and I use this just to catch any gags. Like if my machine was not threaded right, then I would know instantly when I stitched through the scrap charger, and that would be on that scrap rather than on my actual pieces on my quilt. So it's very handy. It also reduces your bobbin thread waste too. Okay, I'm going to reach back and lift up my foot. I'm just lifting it ever so slightly here, and then I'm sliding those pieces right underneath the foot, and then dropping the needle down. So right here I'm pushing all the way against the needle and then dropping the foot down. And that ensures that the very next stitch that I take is onto those fabrics. I'm also making sure to keep those edges in nice alignment with the edge of the patchwork foot. Kind of just a process of keeping everything lined up just exactly right. There we go. Now if you have enough space, and we do here because this is a pretty long row, you can go on ahead and chain on maybe the opposite end. That's actually feeling just a little bit tight to rotate that around and try and piece through that in. So I'm just going to grab another scrap charger, stitch through that, clip off my row, return it to the front of the machine, and then now I'll do basically the exact same set of steps. I'm going to look at both sides of my row and look for areas of seam allowance. Now you might have a spot where, there's no extra seam allowance, there's no half square triangles, nothing like that, in which case it doesn't matter which side goes through the machine first. But anytime that I have a half square triangle involved, I want that seam to go in first. And another thing is, whenever I clip my wonder clips, I'm not really bothering to be accurate about that. I'm not really fussing with the fabrics and getting them in nice alignment. I'm just clipping them together really quick. So another thing that I do at the machine is take a little time to stack those fabrics perfectly on top of one another, and also make sure that all of the edges and the corners are lined up too. Okay, so now I'm going to reach back, lift the foot, slide the pieces all the way under right up against the needle, and then begin stitching. It's just a combination of little habits. You might notice that I'm being very methodical. I take my time with this, and I honestly believe that it's just a combination of these little habits that really produce accurate piecing with every single seam. And another thing you can do, if you're wondering about your seam allowance, you can measure it. So take a ruler, place it over your seam, and you can double check it that way too. You can also open out your seam, press it flat, and measure your finished size of your pieces too. So there we go. I'm just going to continue piecing through this row, just stitching each fabric together one by one, exactly as you've just seen. And I'll meet you back here when we're ready to start piecing those rows together to form the second block. So here are all of the rows pieced together, and you can see I pressed the seam allowances open here on the back. And just in case you've heard that that's a bad thing, please keep in mind that I stitch with a very tight stitch length, 1.5 millimeter stitch length, to seam those pieces together. So I feel like this is perfectly safe for my quilts, and it results in a really nice flat quilt that's going to be much easier to quilt over. It's also a lot more accurate too, so the pieces are coming out the right size. Okay, so we're going to piece together, I'm going to piece together this set of rows, and we're going to pin them together. I don't use clips when I'm really wanting to be accurate with my pinning, with making sure everything is going together really perfectly. For this, I pull out street pins, these short little street pins that are nice and thin. So first step is to stack up your pieces and make sure that the edges of the rows are nicely stacked together that way, and then pull back on that top fabric and just make sure that that seam is nicely aligned, and then pin in place. And I'm going to pin anywhere the fabric changes color. So anywhere that it really matters that the seams line up just exactly right. So I'm going to pin these pieces together, and then I'll take it to the machine and start piecing. So I'm here at the machine, and I'm just double checking that those fabrics are perfectly lined up all the way to the end, all the way around the corner. There we go. Now just lift up slightly on that foot and push the pieces right up against the needle. So the very first stitch I take is onto the fabric. Okay, now I'm going to stitch right up to the needle and take it out. And you want to, as you're coming up close to this area of seam allowance, you want to just double check that, lift up on it ever so slightly. So here I'm going to lift up on that, just make sure that it's not flipping over. And then I press hard with my fingertips as I stitch right up to it. And that helps maintain control, stops it from slipping too. I'll slide out that pen. You want to also make sure that the edges of the row, this outer edge on this side, they stay stacked up nicely together and nothing flips over, and also everything stays right in line with the edge of your patchwork foot. There's just a lot of different things to keep in mind, there's a lot of different things to constantly be watching for. There we go. One thing I love about this machine is I can tap the pedal like this and take one single stitch, and that's really nice. It gives you a lot of good control. There we go. That looks good. Now I'm coming up on the second part. You don't have to pin every single seam. I hope you can see that. Some of these, where we're matching up just white fabric to white fabric or yellow fabric to yellow fabric, you don't need to pin that. it's where the colors are changing that you really just want those half square triangles. You want those pieces to line up just exactly right. Okay, nearly at the end here. And this is how I normally piece. It's a start-stop process. Take your time. You know, when it comes to piecing the individual squares together, the half square triangles and the squares and all those different shapes, you can kind of speed up a little bit. It's chain piecing, but when you're putting the rows of the quilt together, you want to take your time. Okay, I hit an area and it's pretty bulky, and you might experience this too. You might have to lift up ever so slightly on your foot, and then again, tap. You know, if you have to, lift up the foot and adjust it slightly. What might end up happening is my seam allowance might have flipped over right there, and I'll need to double check it. If it has, I will just rip that one little section, flip the seam allowance back the right way, and correct for that. Okay, so coming up on one last pin, stop with the needle in the down position, remove that pin, and then stitch the rest of the way down. So once I get that seam stitched, I'm going to go on ahead and press the seam allowances open, and I always finger press first. Get your fingers in there, dig in there, and flatten it out. I run my fingernail against the seam so that way it flattens it out completely. If you try and do this with your iron, with the tip of your iron, you can really gouge at the fabric. You're not going to flatten it completely, and then it also can kind of start to scorch your fabric a little bit. So all of that, not so good. So I really think finger pressing, finger creasing is one very important step, and then grab your iron and give it a good solid press, nice and flat. There we go. Okay, now we flip it over and take a look, and you can see everywhere we pinned, we had a really beautiful join. Everything is so nicely matching up. So from here, it's a really simple process of piecing the rest of the block together. I'll piece the remaining 2 rows together, then the center seam, add the borders on the edges, and here's what it looked like whenever I finished piecing our second Leaf Peepers block. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed learning how to piece the second quilt block with me today. Now, if you'd like to learn how to make the half square triangles for this block, which is 8 half square triangles in one go. It's a really cool technique. You can find Sherry's video on how to do that at wholecirclestudio.com. This is a collaboration quilt along, so she's doing a few videos and I'm doing a few videos, and every week we're linking everything up together so that way we can guide you along the way. So I hope that you'll check out her video as well, and I want you to know that you can join in this quilt along anytime. All you need to join in is a copy of the Leaf Peepers quilt pattern. You can find that at leahday.com/leaf. Until next time, let's go quilt.